My name is Tara Capel and I'm a PhD student from the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, and I'll be presenting our work on the wooden quilt probe, carving out personal narratives in a women-only makerspace. There is increasing interest within interaction design in hacking, making, crafting, and DIY practices, and the spaces in which these activities take place. These spaces, commonly referred to as makerspaces or hackerspaces, are open spaces designed to be accessible by everyone, providing access to a range of communal facilities and resources. While there are many positives to makerspaces, women can face barriers to participation and are consequently underrepresented within them. Women have historically also been excluded from learning and working with particular types of materials, for example wood, particularly during their schooling. To explore how we might address these inequalities in regards to both access to makerspace environments and to diverse materials, I'll discuss our use of a wooden quilt probe, through which we aim to 1. Create a makerspace environment specifically for women where they could engage with materials traditionally found in more male-dominated craft environments, in order to learn some of the skills, tools and language associated with those materials, and 2. Share stories and experiences with other women within the community centre. This research took place within a community centre in Brisbane, Australia. To recruit participants, we visited drop-in sessions organised by the community centre twice a week. We started with 4 participants and had 2 of those participants complete their panels, Claire and Jennifer, whose names have been changed. Both the use of the wood and quilt elements of the wooden quilt probe were important. The use of the wood material was intended to give the participants an opportunity to work with a different material which they'd not had access to previously. Although not usually made from wood, the quilt element of the probe was chosen due to both their narrative qualities and the rich tradition they hold in women's craft. Quilts are embedded in a long history of women expressing themselves creatively through various craft activities. Reflecting this, the participants were able to share personal narratives through physically carving them into the wooden panels and through the accompanying video. The wooden quilt probe shares similarities with Wallace et al.'s design probes and Sora et al.'s dialogical probes. The key difference of the wooden quilt probe from these type of probes, as well as Bennett's biographical prototypes, is that the women's involvement in creating the probe also enabled them to develop new skills and engage with different materials and tools. To create the wooden quilt probe, we ran 10 design workshops over the course of 3 months within the community centre's hall. These workshops were held weekly and ran for around 2 to 3 hours each. At the conclusion of the workshops, we conducted semi-structured interviews with the 2 participants at their homes. Throughout the workshops, we had captured stories that the participants had shared, which we then shared with the participants during the interview. This enabled them to remove or change elements or add to the stories. We were also interested in exploring their experience during the workshops and in creating their wooden panel, as well as other making activities they may engage in. We have permission to share our participants' stories through our paper and this presentation under different names. In retelling the stories of the 2 workshop participants, we framed each story around 3 themes: personal trajectories and life disruptions, making and materials, and well-being and empowerment. I will first discuss the story carved into the wooden panel and verbalized through the accompanying video, and then highlight some of the participants' stories, more of which are shared through the paper. The overall theme of Claire's panel was life and was split into 2 parts. The top section was a series of stairs that represented the ups and downs of life, and the bottom section represented the twists and turns of life. As was alluded to in her wooden panel, Claire had suffered 2 strokes, which were represented by the large drops in the stairs of her wooden panel. While she had recovered completely from both strokes, she shared many stories within the workshop around these experiences in her life, particularly around her recovery, such as teaching herself to read and gaining back her memories. Claire enjoyed creating counted cross-stitch, but did not know how to sew or knit. She had mentioned this to one of her neighbours, who was surprised given her gender and the generation she was from. Claire had not been able to participate in woodworking during her schooling and had signed up to the workshops to learn new skills around working with wood. She was hoping to learn more woodworking skills and basic power tools in order to do her own repair work. Claire found the women-only environment friendly to learn within. Claire shared stories of being a medical laboratory technician and how closely related the skill she was learning for carving the panel was to the work she used to do, including slicing small specimens under a microscope and testing samples. These stories were generally triggered by something happening in the workshop. She felt empowered that she had not lost her fine motor skills, and she was able to transfer them over to a new skill and different material. The overall theme of Jennifer's panel was nature and home. She carved a tiger snake's head and had also carved the wood surrounding the snake head in a way that the texture looked as if the snake was swimming through it. She spoke about her love of nature and growing up in a small coastal town where she was often either swimming or hiking. The snake also had a double meaning that she shared through the workshops, in that it also represented some of the people she had encountered in her life. Jennifer mentioned that she'd had a really rough 5 years, but that things were now starting to look better for her. As alluded through the snake, she attributed this to the people she was surrounding herself with before, who she had removed from her life, and was now more careful about who she included in her life. Jennifer identified herself as an artist who described the table she had at home filled with her different art projects. She talked about various projects she was working on, including finger puppets to send to her grandchildren and a painted boomerang for her son. She had also recently been commissioned to paint a mural at the community centre on one of the walls outside, and she shared what she was planning on doing with the mural. Jennifer had never tried wood carving. She decided to participate as she thought it would be a nice challenge and a good opportunity to pick up a new skill. Beyond the materials she was currently working with as an artist, she also reflected upon those she had not had access to during school and the importance of women-only spaces. Spending time in nature and participating in making activities were both important elements to Jennifer in terms of maintaining well-being. Jennifer brought up the therapeutic and empowering nature of the wood carving over a few workshops, where she described it as empowering to do stuff you didn't know you could do before, and good to just have your brain focus on one thing for a time. A therapeutic element also came from being able to not only share elements of her own life, but also hear about other women's lives and being able to empathize with what was being shared. From our insights, we propose 3 implications for interaction design, including reflections on diversifying makerspace environments that enable women's participation within them, the intertwined nature of storytelling and making, and the boundaries around sharing personal narratives. Diversifying makerspace environments that enable women's participation within them is an important topic for interaction design. We hope that the Wooden Quilt Probe will inspire other interaction designers to create makerspace environments that allow for more diverse participation, along with creating artifacts and nurturing creative practices. In creating a makerspace environment, designers should consider the tools and materials made available, as well as the activities and interactions that work to support participants in forging connections and building confidence. We have found that building confidence often comes from building competence around using materials and tools participants have not worked with before. While it was important to both participants that they have access to wood materials in order to learn new skills, they also expressed the benefit of doing so within a women-only environment in terms of security, togetherness, privacy, and comfort. The women-only workshops leveled the playing field when it came to learning with new tools and materials, typically associated with men. Their participation within the workshops and working with the wood material was an empowering experience in that they had a chance to do something that they'd not done before. The makerspace environment and the length of time the workshops ran for also enabled us to be with our participants in a way that forged new partnerships and built rapport between us and our participants and between the participants themselves. From this perspective, we emphasize the importance of long-term engagement within the communities we are working, either existing or those we create, and engaging participants in hands-on activities over a period of time. However, while the Wooden Quilt Probe and the workshops overall were a positive experience for the participants, and the discussions held within them were valuable to all involved, we do acknowledge that participation also required a large commitment from our participants due to the time-consuming nature of wood carving. Consequently, we face challenges in sustaining participation over the course of the workshops. One of the main insights from this work is how closely intertwined storytelling and making are. Stories become the materials for making, and conversely, the process of making opens up opportunities for generating stories. Both designers and participants can benefit from this interplay between stories and materials in order to nurture curiosity and allow stories to unfold in much greater nuance and with a greater depth than is possible to bring forth through methods such as interviews and focus groups. The stories carved within the wooden panel enabled our participants to commit their stories to material. However, the wooden panel and accompanying video captured small snapshots of the participants' larger stories and experiences that materialized through making their wooden panel within the workshops. While the process of creating the wooden panel was important and at its completion held a lot of meaning for our participants, their engagement in the workshops themselves were also meaningful in terms of building relationships and connecting with other women over shared experiences, and enabling self-reflection around how they see themselves and how they want to be seen. By opening up new spaces and facilitating engagement with new tools and materials, we begin to open up new areas of design. It also allows for new opportunities for self-expression, dialogue and reflection between the participants themselves, participants and researchers, and participants and their wooden panel. Finally, as designers, it is also important to consider when not to design and to engage in dialogue with participants to elaborate, negotiate, and protect boundaries. We started this research with ideas around sharing stories within and beyond the workshop by embedding the wooden quilt probe and the accompanying video recordings in a digital notice board in the community centre. However, as we engaged more with our participants, we learnt that sharing stories is not always desirable and that it can create drawbacks and shift the dynamics and perceptions within a community. In reflecting on how we might design interactions in ways that ensure that participants remain in control of their personal stories, and if we even should design, we found the notion of boundary management as a dynamic process useful. In particular, we reflected on the notions of disclosure, identity, and temporality discussed by Palin and Durish in the context of privacy management, and how these apply to managing the boundaries of sharing personal narratives, which are shared in more detail in our paper. For our project, these reflections meant that we did not continue with the design of a digital notice board as we had initially intended. While the wooden quilt probe is currently in the possession of the first author, the wooden panels belong to the participants and will be returned to them at the conclusion of this research. Thank you.